In 1960, a team used dynamite on a strange hill in Turkey and found nothing. They called it a freak of nature and left. For decades, believers kept coming back and skeptics kept laughing. Then AI got involved. In 2023, a machine learning system scanned radar images from beneath that hill. It highlighted shapes that looked nothing like random geology. A 234-foot corridor through the center, rooms branching off like a floor plan, and traces of decomposed wood and soil, chemically different from everything around it. The hill is 515 feet long, the same measurement the Bible gives for Noah's Ark. The AI didn't think that was coincidence. The story began quietly in October 1959, when a Turkish Air Force captain named İlhan Durupunar studied a set of aerial photographs taken for NATO mapping work. As he moved his eyes across the ridges and valleys about 18 miles south of Mount Ararat, something unusual caught him. It was a long, smooth outline resting on a slope roughly 6,300 feet above sea level. The shape seemed too neat for nature. It stretched about 157 meters, close to 515 feet, and widened between 26 and 50 meters. It looked like the hull of a ship resting on a mountainside, and the length felt almost eerie because it matched the biblical measurements of Noah's Ark, which was described as 300 cubits, often calculated at about 515 feet. That single detail started a quiet wave of curiosity that grew fast. By 1960, a joint Turkish-American team led by Arthur Brandenberger and George Vandeman hiked out to see it. For 2 days, they dug into the strange mound and even used dynamite when the soil resisted them. They hoped for petrified wood or any sign of ancient craftsmanship, but walked away saying they saw no visible archaeological remains. They labeled it a freak of nature and moved on. It seemed like the end of the story, yet a small feeling lingered because even Brandenberger admitted the investigation had been too quick. After seeing the photos and then the site for himself, he said it was hard to explain how such a shape formed naturally. That doubt kept the place alive in whispers. Still, almost 20 years passed with little activity because the terrain was rough and politics made access difficult. Then, in the late 1970s, the old curiosity found new life when Ron Wyatt arrived. He was not a traditional archaeologist. He worked as a nurse anesthetist, but spent his free time chasing biblical history. In 1977, he stood at the site for the first time, and something about the symmetry pulled him in. Over the next several years, he returned again and again with tools that were far more modern than anything used in 1960. He brought metal detectors, subsurface radar, and what he said were core samples from inside the formation. His team claimed they saw the shape of a shipwreck frozen in earth. They talked about a keel-like line, patterns that looked like internal walls, and fragments that they believed were fossilized wood. They even found iron nodules that they interpreted as ancient nails or brackets. Skeptics said the nodules were just limonite or other natural iron minerals, but Wyatt's excitement spread anyway. He shared his findings in churches, films, and talks, and the site began to draw new attention. By the mid-1980s, even some scientists started taking a closer look. Dr. John Baumgardner from Los Alamos and David Fasold, a marine salvage expert, carried out ground-penetrating radar and magnetometer surveys. They believed they saw regular internal patterns that reminded Fasold of bulkheads. Their confidence grew to the point that in 1986, the Turkish government formally recognized the place as a possible Ark location. On June 20, 1987, the Ministry of Culture declared it a protected national park, named Noah's Ark National Park. A visitor center was built and a ceremony dedicated the formation as the place of Noah's Ark. It was a rare moment where a government publicly honored a site with such a legendary connection, even though no definitive evidence had surfaced. Turkish geologist Dr. Salih Bayraktutan studied the area and encouraged more research, while people in the nearby Kurdish village of Uzengili embraced the story. The ridge itself was known as Kudi Dagi, echoing the Quranic name Juday, which added another layer of belief that this mountain range might hide an ancient memory. Still, not everyone agreed. As more geologists examined samples and reports, doubts began to spread. By the early 1990s, the enthusiasm from earlier years started to slow. David Fasold, who had once defended the site passionately, began rethinking everything after almost a decade without a single confirmed artifact. In 1996, he joined geologist Dr. Lawrence Collins to publish a detailed study in the Journal of Geosciences Education. Their conclusion was blunt. They wrote that the formation could not be Noah's Ark and could not even be a man-made model. They argued that the shape was the result of natural processes, especially a type of bending in rock layers called a syncline, mixed with erosion and mud flow. Lab tests on samples showed mud and rock instead of petrified wood. The iron pieces from Wyatt's investigations turned out to be natural iron oxide nodules. Radar images that seemed to show bulkheads were more likely fractures or layers in the earth. A large void once thought to be a room might simply have been a pocket created by erosion or dissolving stone. Geologists also pointed out that the site was not even on Mount Ararat itself, but on the slopes of Mount Tenderek, which sits thousands of feet lower than Ararat's peak. The Genesis account places the Ark in the mountains of Ararat, and some take that literally to mean a high-altitude landing, rather than a valley inside a young volcanic region. Mount Ararat last erupted in 1840, making the area geologically active and unlikely to preserve an ancient wooden structure in perfect shape. These arguments grew louder and led many to classify Durupunar as a natural formation that happened to look like a ship. In 2014, a small group of Turkish and international researchers arrived at Durupunar with a simple plan. They wanted to run a limited electronic survey across the strange mound at the base of Mount Ararat, and they carried tools like electrical resistivity tomography and ground-penetrating radar. As they swept their instruments over the soil, the first signals that appeared on their screens made them pause. Hidden beneath the mound were long, straight lines and curious right-angle shapes. Natural geology rarely behaves that neatly, so the team felt a quiet push of excitement growing inside them. They decided they needed more time and more powerful tools to understand what they were seeing. That moment set everything in motion. By 2019, a more advanced GPR survey had been arranged. This time, they laid out a full grid of scanning lines across the entire ship-shaped outline. The team gathered layer after layer of raw radar slices, each one nothing more than pulses bouncing off buried shapes. And yet, when they processed the data and built it into a single 3D underground image, the picture that slowly formed changed the mood in the room. Inside the mound were patterns that looked strangely organized. Straight lines ran along the length. Perpendicular reflections created spaces that resembled walls. One long reflection down the middle hinted at a central passage stretching about 234 feet. Smaller reflections extended outward from it, almost like rooms branching off a hallway. The more they looked, the harder it became to shake the feeling that they were staring at the ghostly outline of something built by human hands. Even then, excitement was balanced with caution. Maybe it was a ship-like layout, maybe it was just sediment layers playing tricks. The only way to know was to test it again. And this led to more work in 2020 and 2021. The Turkish government sponsored a scientific project focused on the site. LiDAR was used to create detailed 3D surface maps, and more ground scans were run with university teams and a documentary crew recording everything. Once again, the instruments picked up anomalies beneath the soil. Electrical resistivity scans outlined rectangular areas matching the shapes the radar had already suggested. No matter which tool they used, the strange, crisp geometry kept showing up. The idea of an organized layout beneath the hill became harder to dismiss, but anyone familiar with geophysics knows how delicate interpretation can be. Critics like Andrew Snelling warned that these readings could just be geological noise. A rock layer, a crack, a cluster of buried roots or minerals could produce reflections that look man-made. Everyone knew that humans tend to see patterns even when none exist. Because of this, the core research team realized they needed help from a different kind of tool, one that could cut through human bias and highlight only what was truly there. In 2023, that turning point came with new software and artificial intelligence. The team, working through a California-based project called Noah's Ark Scans, led by Andrew Jones, fed their massive store of GPR slices into machine learning systems designed to detect geometric forms. They wanted the computer to scan every pixel, every echo, every faint return, and decide whether the shapes were random noise or something structured. When the results came back, the researchers felt a wave of disbelief roll through the room. The AI highlighted long parallel lines running the entire length of the formation. It outlined right angles in places where natural formations rarely create them. It picked out repeating segments that felt more like ribs and bulkheads than scattered stones. Suddenly, the blurry impressions from earlier years sharpened into something more convincing. Jones and his team explained that the enhanced 3D scans revealed what looked like central and side corridors stretching through the length of the formation. The main internal feature appeared to be a passage around 4 meters wide, running straight through the center. Off to the sides, the scans showed slimmer divisions that could easily be interpreted as rooms or stalls. And as they examined different depths, they realized the structure contained 3 levels, each separated by horizontal reflections spaced at different depths between 20 and 25 feet. Those 3 levels mirrored the biblical lines from Genesis describing lower, second, and third decks. To the team, the match felt impossible to ignore. Another detail made the scans even more compelling. A void space appeared right in the heart of the structure. According to their measurements, a cavity stretching about 13 meters in length ran through the center. Turkish sources had reported a similar tunnel. The American team described a central space roughly 13 feet wide, extending deep through the structure. When these reports were compared, it became clear that the researchers were circling around the same discovery. Something inside the formation was hollow, shaped, and positioned exactly where a central hall or cargo area would be in a giant vessel. Radar images published later showed a ship-like pattern, with a long middle cavity flanked by evenly spaced side anomalies that resembled internal supports. Jones tried to stay careful in interviews, aware of how bold their findings sounded. He said they were not expecting an intact boat, but rather chemical traces, fragments of decomposed wood, and the faint outline of a hull. Thousands of years would erase nearly everything except the imprint of what once existed. Still, Jones told Christian Broadcasting Network that the features they mapped were not what anyone would expect if the hill were just a block of rock or a pile of random mudflow debris. The alignment of the shapes, the way they repeated, and the way they fit together created a pattern more consistent with design than accident. Something else caught their attention as they walked the site. The grass growing directly over the mound looked different. It was richer, greener, and thicker than the plants on the surrounding hillside. This suggested that the soil within the ship-shaped boundary had a different composition. If something long buried was changing the chemistry of the ground, it could easily influence plant life even after centuries. Jones pointed out that the vegetation inside the outline didn't match the color of the plants outside. It was as if the land itself was quietly revealing that something unusual lay below the surface. They began by wondering if something once alive had left its mark beneath the ground. So, in 2023 and 2024, they decided to test the soil in a careful and steady way. By September, the team collected samples from 22 different spots, choosing locations both inside the outline of the formation and outside it so they could compare them without guessing. When winter came, the samples were taken into labs, and the results started to reveal something surprising. The soil inside the formation held far more organic material than the soil outside. According to the Noah's Ark Scans project, the inner soil showed sharply elevated organic matter and potassium. When Andrew Jones spoke about it, he explained that they found 2.72 times more carbon inside than in the surrounding Earth. That amount of carbon suggested decomposed once living material resting beneath the surface. At the same time, The potassium level inside was about 40% higher, which caught the team's attention because potassium tends to rise when wood or vegetation breaks down over time. A soil scientist on the team named William Crabtree helped make sense of these numbers. He said that if this site once held a wooden structure and its wood slowly rotted away, you would expect to see higher potassium, shifting pH levels, and richer organic content. And that was exactly what the readings showed. Rotted wood becomes soil over centuries and releases carbon and nutrients like potassium. If the ark had stood there long ago and its beams had decayed right where they were, the soil inside the shape would be richer than the soil outside. Crabtree looked at the samples and said the interior soil was not behaving like natural mud flow. He felt the chemical pattern looked like the fingerprint of something that once lived. The carbon content was roughly double. The potassium was sharply elevated, and he noted that these signs pointed toward the presence of rotted plant matter and possibly wood ash mixed into the earth. As they continued studying the numbers, another detail emerged. The pH inside the formation seemed slightly more acidic than the soil outside. This mattered because decaying wood can lower soil pH over time. The full pH charts have not yet been released, but Crabtree suggested the readings matched what you would expect if old wood had been breaking down below the surface. When Jones expanded on it, he said that rotting wood becomes humus, a dark carbon-rich material, and this humus adds organic matter to the soil. The data from the site showed that this carbon-rich residue was more abundant inside the outline than outside, which added another clue to the pile. Then came something even more intriguing. During the analysis, the team reported traces of what they described as biochemical signatures tied to wood. In late 2025, the project released a statement saying that pieces of ancient wood might have been identified in the soil. It did not mean someone found full pieces of timber. Instead, it meant that microscopic fragments or chemical markers linked to decayed wood were present. The team mentioned cellulose breakdown products, lignin traces, and other compounds that linger long after the structure they came from disappears. They said the soil was giving up hints of something made from plant material that had once stood there. To them, it felt as if the earth itself was holding the ghost of a wooden shape, a chemical outline created by long-vanished beams. While these clues kept growing, the researchers also turned back to the dimensions of the formation. The Durupunar shape stretches about 157 meters, which corresponds to 300 ancient cubits, if one uses a slightly longer 20.6-inch cubit. Its width reaches around 26 meters. This aligns closely with the 50-cubit width described in Genesis. The current height of the surviving structure is around 16 meters, which does not fall far from the biblical 30 cubits that equal about 52 feet. A Turkish scholar said the measurements fit almost to the cubit, and Nezi Bazgilin pointed out that radar studies confirmed the length to be the same as the one given for the Ark. It could still be coincidence, of course, since a long ship and a long fold in the earth can share a shape. But the match becomes more interesting when placed beside the new soil chemistry and the subsurface mapping. Together, they paint a picture that feels harder to dismiss. By the end of 2024, the growing evidence sparked a wave of media attention. Many outlets reported the story with a mixture of excitement and caution. Headlines spoke about a possible discovery of Noah's Ark and highlighted the radar images showing a hull-like shape, the soil signatures pointing to once living material, and the hints of wood fragments buried under layers of mud. They also reported the claim that 3 layers, matching the idea of decks, had been mapped beneath the ground. For the public, the idea that chemical signatures, soil anomalies, and hidden structural shapes could align this closely felt astonishing. After centuries of failed searches, it suddenly seemed as if modern scanning technologies might be uncovering something older than recorded history. One quiet clue at a time. The reaction to the new findings rose like a wave that started far away and slowly reached every shore. It first swept through religious circles, where believers from different faiths felt a spark that they had been waiting for. Christians, Jews, and Muslims shared the same breath of excitement because the idea that Noah's Ark might finally be found touched something deep inside them. Many had followed the search for years, so when the news surfaced, social media filled with people calling it proof that ancient texts had spoken the truth all along. They saw the discovery at Durupunar as more than an archaeological note. It felt like a bridge between past and present, something that connected their beliefs to something they could almost touch. Pastors and theologians stepped forward with their own thoughts. Some talked about how the ark symbolized judgment and salvation, and how powerful it would be if such a relic had survived. Others reminded their followers to keep their faith centered on belief, rather than objects. Ken Ham wrote that people didn't need the ark to trust the story of the flood, yet even he admitted how remarkable it would be to find it. So, churches waited with a hopeful kind of patience, imagining what might come next. The response in Turkey added another layer to the story. The government had already turned the place into a national park years ago, and now interest began to rise again. Officials from Aru province spoke carefully, while also protecting a site that carried cultural value. Scientists from universities in Istanbul and Ankara joined the effort, showing that Turkey wanted the work to be scientific and responsible. In the region, mostly Kurdish villagers who had always believed the slope was linked to Noah felt a quiet sense of pride. Their stories had passed through generations, and now the world was looking at the very place they had long respected. The small visitor center that once stood almost empty was now preparing for crowds, with expectations of pilgrims, tourists, and researchers making their way up the winding road. Meanwhile, skepticism moved just as strongly, though in a different direction. Scientists and archaeologists reminded everyone that big claims needed solid proof. They pointed out that no man-made objects had been recovered yet. They also knew that radar images could be tricky, because the earth beneath us often creates shapes that look meaningful, even when they're formed by natural forces. Dr. Andrew Snelling explained that people might see corridors or rooms in the scans simply because they were hoping to find them. He described how limestone and mud could shift and crack into neat lines, creating an illusion of structure. He also questioned the location itself, noting that the biblical account placed the ark on higher mountains, not on a slope formed by volcanic activity. He believed the geology alone made the idea unlikely. Other experts mentioned the history of earthquakes and mud flows in the area. The formation had been exposed after a 1948 event, and some thought the shape might be a strange but natural result of those forces. Layers of lava or sediment could have created the three-tier look described in the radar data. Voids might be old gas pockets. Enriched soil might come from vegetation trapped there over centuries. These explanations weren't exciting, but they had to be ruled out before anyone could claim something extraordinary. The research team knew that, which is why they kept showing their data, inviting review, and stressing that their work was scientific and open. Some academic voices stayed somewhere in the middle. They said the evidence was more interesting than past claims and didn't want to dismiss it outright. They said that if core drilling produced ancient timber or objects shaped by human hands, the whole conversation would change instantly. Media outlets began to cover the story with a steady tone, offering curiosity and caution side by side. National Geographic, major networks, and even NBC's Today Show ran segments. When a morning show spends 3 minutes on Noah's Ark, it shows how far the story has traveled. Within the biblical archaeology world, the debate grew sharper. People like Bill Krause remembered earlier disappointments and urged believers not to jump ahead. Others insisted this time felt different because the technology was better and the evidence more layered. Answers in Genesis posted a careful review, highlighting geological problems while still acknowledging the excitement. They wanted believers to stay rational yet open, not staking their faith on something that needed more testing. As early 2026 approached, the focus shifted to what would happen next. The Noah's Ark Scans team and their Turkish partners prepared for the most important step so far. They had spent years scanning without digging, but they knew skeptics would never be convinced. until physical evidence surfaced. That meant touching the formation itself. In mid-2025, the group announced plans for a controlled excavation, slow and systematic, shaped by permits and the oversight of Turkish authorities. They had already identified high-priority spots using radar. One was near a space they believed to be a 13-foot corridor. Another was where sharp angles hinted at a possible bulkhead. The hope was to find wood that had resisted decay, or even impressions where beams had once rested. If they found anything like that, radiocarbon dating could reveal its age. A date close to 4,500 years old would electrify the world. A younger date would force the theory to collapse. Either way, a single sample could change the whole story. Because the site is a national park, the Turkish government had to approve everything. Their willingness to involve top universities suggested they saw this as legitimate science. Reports said the team would work with these institutions to study and protect the site before digging. Harsh winters and unstable geology meant that any excavation had to be gentle and thoughtful. The team expected to begin with more core drilling, bringing up slender cylinders of earth that might hold fragments of something old. If those cores revealed anything unusual, a full excavation would follow. The researchers also planned to expand soil analysis to draw a clearer picture of what lay inside and outside the formation. More sampling could reveal chemical patterns that would outline the shape of whatever once stood there. The inside already had higher levels of carbon and potassium. If more samples confirmed that contrast, the picture would become sharper. Advanced tools like XRF scans might detect subtle traces left behind by organic materials. Even the idea of minerals linked to animals sparked imagination. They hadn't reported such findings yet, but the possibilities stayed open. Deeper radar and seismic tomography were also in development, promising even clearer images. With the help of AI, the scans might reveal details that previous generations could only dream about. Satellites kept watching the site too, tracking changes and building precise maps. But the real mystery remained under the soil, waiting for careful hands. Everyone involved understood how delicate the work was. If the Ark was truly there, it had survived thousands of years. Another year or two spent studying it properly would be worth it. The team knew that rushing in could ruin both evidence and credibility. That's why they welcomed outside eyes and began preparing papers for peer review. Their findings needed to survive the scrutiny of experts if they were going to matter. While they did that, they also raised funds and prepared logistics for a possible excavation in the summer of 2026 or 2027. Snow covered the site for most of the year, and late summer was the only window when the land was accessible. Skeptics like Dr. Collins and Dr. Snelling waited for proof they could measure. Collins had said he would love to be proven wrong, that it would thrill him as a person of faith, but he still needed physical evidence. Scientists around the world felt the same. They might lean toward doubt, but they also understood how historic the discovery would be if it turned out to be real. Even if it wasn't the Ark, the formation itself would remain a rare geological puzzle worth studying.